This is the final Tuesday of Lent. Lent ends on Easter Sunday. Lent is a season in which we create space to encounter God. We give up things that distract us. We take up things that help us realign and refocus our intention to hearing God's voice. This year, we specifically wanted to engage in Lent through the lens of finding rest for our souls, based on a very famous saying that Jesus says in Matthew 28, where he said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So as I said, we've been spending Lent talking about the things that prevent us from finding that kind of rest for our souls, because they also tend to be the things that prevent us from connecting to God. Previously, we've talked about perfectionism and worry, apathy, busyness. Last week, we talked about gluttony. And this week, we were talking about holding grudges. Bit of a caveat / disclaimer. I was not going to talk about this in this series. This is something that very actively shows up in my life right now. And I try to be really careful to not use my position in our gatherings as like therapy for myself. I try to balance being vulnerable and honest and authentic with all of you, while also not abusing the privilege of speaking to take advantage of a captive audience to be in therapy with me. So that was part of why I was not necessarily going to talk about this week, but I was supposed to talk about pride, and I wrote about half the talk, and something wasn't right. And then I thought about this, and I felt really convicted to speak on this. So that's what we're doing, but it wasn't the plan. So let's talk about grudges. What is a grudge? What is holding a grudge? It is harboring anger, bitterness, resentment, or other negative feelings long after someone has done something to hurt you, often featuring persistent rumination about the incident and ill will toward the person or persons. I want to be sure that you don't hear me saying something that I'm not saying. So we are specifically talking about grudges. We are not talking about anger, or at least not the emotion of anger. Anger as an emotion is not good or bad. It is neutral. It is an emotion that we have that is built into us. It is hardwired into us. It's actually a helpful warning indicator. When you feel angry, it's a sign that something has happened that isn't right. Something has happened that made you feel incompetent or insignificant or impotent. Those tend to be the big three. Something or someone has wounded you. Anger helps us be aware that something's gone wrong. And in that sense, feeling anger is not wrong. Holding a grudge is not the same as feeling angry, although feelings of anger can be part of holding a grudge. Holding a grudge is choosing to hold on to that anger, allowing it to fester into resentment and bitterness that you persistently think about and cannot move on from. Sometimes this is a very conscious thing. Sometimes this is unconscious, and it comes out sideways. If you or someone you know has an anger problem, oftentimes this is an unconscious grudge. When people fly off the handle at objectively small things, it's because that objectively small thing has triggered some unresolved resentment or wound in their life. So this is what road rage is, right? Someone either on purpose or unintentionally cuts you off. That is a signal to you that you are insignificant. That person made you feel insignificant, which can trigger a deeper wound, and you respond disproportionately because this person who, let's just say, had no idea that they just did this to you, has triggered this deeper wound, and you feel that level of wounding all over again at this person who's just trying to also get home. I've had this happen a lot in my life, but there's one season of my life that I can very clearly remember. I forget what year of college it was, but I was in this math class called Linear Algebra and Differential Equations, which sounds like a humble brag, right? That sounds fancy. I was really bad at it, and I can't remember any of it. So not impressive. But I always left that class enraged, just so mad, because because I was really bad at it. I would walk to the light rail from my class just seething anger. I would listen to really angry music, and I would ride home angry. I was just so angry the rest of the day. I was disproportionately, irrationally angry every time I got out of this class. Feeling incompetent in this area of difficult math, at least difficult for me, triggered deep wounds that I had about feeling incompetent in the past that I wasn't really conscious of and had never really worked through. I just thought I hated math. I wasn't wrong, but there was more going on here. There are also, so that's an unconscious example, but we know what it feels like to have a conscious grudge against someone. I have two examples of this that have come to the top of my head. One is kind of silly and one is not so silly. The first one, this is something that I still think about all the time, and I've tried really hard to stop thinking about it, but when I was in high school, I was, my senior year of high school, part of this underground newspaper. We wrote articles that ranged from like really cheesy to like, I think hilarious, making fun of different groups of kids. You can't do that anymore, but like, so I wrote this whole article about, this is 2005. I wrote this whole article about the subculture of emo stuff that was happening and wrote it as though I was like a National Geographic explorer stumbling across this new tribe of people. I thought it was really, really funny. The school got very upset about it. And they started looking at all of the security footage of the school and found who was passing these things out. And they caught me, because at that time I used to wear a bright blue Superman hoodie. I don't know why. I don't really like Superman, but every Friday I would wear that. And so immediately when they saw it, they knew it was me. The security guards didn't actually know my name. They showed up to the class I was in and they were like, "We need that kid." So I go to the dean's office and I'm talking to my dean. She thinks my article is really funny. I'm like, it is. It's really good. But she was like, you can't be doing this kind of stuff. So like, let's just not do that anymore. I was like, fine, that's cool. No big deal. The assistant principal walks in and like does this weird power play thing where he basically said to me, "You have to tell us everyone that's involved with this." And I said, "I don't really want to do that. Do I have to do that?" And he said, "You will not graduate if you don't tell me." Which I know now is like, that's stupid. You're not going to stop me from graduating. But I was so scared of that. I was like, my parents are going to kill me, that I just immediately rattled off the names. Immediately after that, I felt, well, okay, so I do that, and then the actual principal walks in. And he is like my dean. He's like, "This is funny, I get it, it's all in good fun, but you guys can't keep doing this stuff, so just please stop doing it." And I looked at the other guy, I was like, what was all that, like, you're not gonna graduate stuff? I felt duped because he lied to me to get what he wanted, and it made me feel incompetent and impotent. And sometimes, when I'm trying to sleep at night, I still think about it. And I really don't like that guy. I don't even remember his name. I'm sure he's a great guy, but just not that day. That's kind of a silly example, right? A more serious example, I had this boss at this nonprofit that I worked at that for a couple weeks would come into my office and talk to me about how good of a job I was doing. Went out of his way to tell me how good of a job I was doing and listed specific things like, "I think you're really doing great here. I think you should continue doing this. I think you're doing a really great job," which is really nice to hear. Who doesn't want to hear that? About a month later, I got a very formal email from him that said that I was being formally disciplined, and he laid out the reasons why, and some of them were exactly the things that he told me I was doing a great job at just weeks before. Some of them were things that just were completely untrue, which I still don't know where they came from. One of them was true, which was that I was defiant in meetings, which was true. I definitely was at that point. But I had to meet with him and all of my superiors, and basically it felt like this person that I looked up to and was underneath betrayed me. They misrepresented me to all these important people in the organization. He lied to me and lied about me, and then it felt like I was not believed when I tried to defend myself. When it was clear that I wasn't going to back down, that I was going to actually fight this and try to get evidence and things, They just sort of pretended like it never happened. There was never any resolution to it. It's just like, oh yeah, I guess that was just a big misunderstanding. But it was like really intense. Like I could not sleep. I was so angry that I had been lied to and then just completely misrepresented, that it felt like all that turmoil for nothing. Like we're just gonna pretend like that didn't happen. It made me feel insignificant and powerless and deeply angry. This was years ago. And I still harbor resentment about this. This is still probably the biggest thing that I am learning to let go of and forgive. And there's a lot more that went into all of that than that, but that was like just a perfect snapshot of that relationship that I still continue to struggle with. Whether conscious or unconscious, holding a grudge is a way that we feel in control and protected. It helps us feel in control and protected, but they only damage us. It almost never even affects the person that we're holding the grudge against. But it affects our entire person. Grudges affect us physically. There have been studies that have shown that holding a grudge, that continual anger and negative emotion, leads to higher blood pressure, leads to heart issues, leads to obesity issues. It affects us mentally. People who hold grudges are much more prone to depression and anxiety and mood disorders and emotional dysregulation. It affects us spiritually. We grow to be more bitter and cynical, and our lives are lacking in love and joy. I think perhaps the most nefarious thing about grudges is that they stunt our growth. I think we all know someone who was hurt by something in the past that they were never really able to move on from. And it's like every time you see this person, they talk about this thing that happened to them. Even if it was years and years and years ago, they constantly talk about and relive this incident that happened to them. It's like they're stuck there. I think a perfect example of this is this guy, who you might recognize if you've seen Napoleon Dynamite, which I realize is a long time ago. But this is immediately who I thought of. This is Uncle Rico. And if you haven't seen this movie, he's an uncle. This is a 40-year-old man who lives in a van by himself in a field, who just films himself throwing footballs and constantly says, if coach had just put me in, we would have won state. Over and over and over again. He's stuck in high school over this thing that happened to him. He is unable to move on with his life. He's unable to get past this thing that he is basically holding a grudge against. Holding a grudge is choosing to stop growing. You continue to age 20, 30 years later, but you cease growing and maturing and developing. God takes this kind of resentment really seriously. I'm going to throw a whole bunch of scripture at you. We're going to talk about each one as we go. But Jesus gives this beautiful picture of what this looks like in a parable called the unforgiving servant from Matthew 18, where he says, the kingdom of God is like a king who decided to square accounts with his servants. As he got underway, one servant was brought before him who had run up a debt of $100,000. He couldn't pay up, so the king ordered the man, along with his wife and children and goods, to be auctioned off at the slave market. The poor wretch threw himself at the king's feet and begged, give me a chance and I'll pay it all back. Touched by his plea, the king let him off, completely erasing the debt. The servant was no sooner out of the room when he came upon one of his fellow servants who owed him $10. He seized him by the throat and demanded, pay up now. The poor wretch threw himself down and begged, give me a chance and I'll pay it all back. But he wouldn't do it. He had him arrested and put in jail until the debt was paid. When the other servants saw this going on, they were outraged and brought a detailed report to the king. The king summoned the man and said, you evil servant, I forgave your entire debt when you begged me for mercy. Shouldn't you be compelled to be merciful to your fellow servant who asked for mercy? The king was furious and put screws to the man until he paid back his entire debt. And that's exactly what my Father in heaven is going to do to each of you who doesn't forgive unconditionally anyone who asks for mercy. So it's this picture of a man who has had a massive debt wiped out, who still holds a tiny, tiny debt against his fellow man. Similarly, when his followers ask him to teach them to pray, in the prayer that Jesus offers, what we call the Lord's Prayer, he includes this line that says, forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. And after the prayer, he offers this concluding thought. In prayer, there's a connection between what God does and what you do. You can't get forgiveness from God, for instance, without also forgiving others. If you refuse to do your part, you cut yourself off from God's part. Now, I think when we hear these two stories, especially right next to each other, it's easy to feel like this is sort of like a shaming thing. Like, how dare you, after all that's been done for you, how dare you not act better or live better? And I think God is never a voice of shame. I think the message behind here is more that the grace that we're extended from God is such a beautiful gift that we've been given. Don't squander it by letting resentments ruin your life. The only way to really receive this beautiful gift of grace is to pass it on to others. If you refuse to forgive others, you're refusing forgiveness for yourself. You're only hurting yourself. Instead, Jesus says things like, be kind to those who hurt you in Matthew 5. He says, here's another old saying that deserves a second look. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Is that going to get us anywhere? Here's what I propose. Don't hit back at all. If someone strikes you, stand there and take it. If someone drags you into court and sues you for the shirt off your back, gift wrap your best coat and make a present of it. And if someone takes unfair advantage of you, use the occasion to practice the servant life. No more tit for tat stuff. Live generously. He goes on to say, when someone gives you a hard time, respond with the supple moves of prayer, for then you are working out of your true selves, your God-created selves. This is what God does. He gives his best, the sun to warm and the rain to nourish, to everyone, regardless, the good and the bad, the nice and the nasty. If all you do is love the lovable, do you expect a bonus? Anybody can do that. If you simply say hello to those who greet you, do you expect a medal? Any run-of-the-mill sinner does that. In a word, what I'm saying is grow up. Your kingdom subjects now live like it. Live out your God-created identity. Live generously and graciously toward others, the way God lives toward you. Paul backs up this idea in Romans 12:19, where he says this simple, beautiful line, don't let evil get the best of you. Get the best of evil by doing good. Holding a grudge is refusing to receive the beautiful gift of grace that's been extended to you from God. Holding a grudge is refusing to live toward others how God lives toward you, generously and graciously. Holding a grudge is very actively allowing evil to get the best of you. We can make the choice to instead get the best of evil by doing good. We can take hold of grace and begin to grow and live out of who God has created us to be by letting go of our resentments and bitterness towards people who have wounded us. And in doing so, we also reflect God to the people around us. How do we go about doing that? Like much in this series, it is far easier to say than do, right? I have two thoughts, and again, they're going to sound very obvious, but these are literally, I think, the things that put us down that path of beginning to let go of our resentments and our anger and our grudges. The first is to acknowledge your wounds. Acknowledge the things that have happened to you. And in doing so, acknowledge your anger. Give voice to your anger. Anger is usually an emotion that protects us from more difficult or complex emotions, or it signals to us that there are deeper emotions going on here. Give a voice, acknowledge those deeper feelings as well. A very simple way to start this process is writing down everything that comes to mind with the basic format of, I'm angry that, fill in the blank. It made or makes me feel, fill in the blank. I don't want you to be too quick to write this off as being elementary. It certainly feels that way at first. I recently just did this process, and I was surprised how many things I had to write down that I didn't really realize were in there, and how many things that I had never acknowledged to myself out loud. It's an elementary exercise that has profound impact, or can have profound impact. Sometimes we need something simple to get us started. Holding a grudge is similar to apathy, which we talked about several weeks ago. We have to acknowledge our anger at what's been done to us and how it has wounded us and how that affects us, for us to begin to work through it and get past it. So acknowledge those things. And then the next thing is move toward forgiveness. That's very complicated, or it can be very complicated, I should say. But I just want to say a couple of things of what forgiveness is and is not. Forgiveness does not mean that you have to allow this person back into your life the same way that it was before. Obviously, if that is possible, that's fantastic. That's wonderful. But forgiving someone does not mean that you have to trust them again. Certainly not automatically. Forgiveness doesn't even necessarily mean that you need to communicate with them. In some instances, that's not possible, either because that is just not a safe person, or because you don't have a way to contact them, or because they're not around anymore. You can still forgive them. Forgiveness doesn't even, in the same way, it doesn't have to be received by them. They don't have to respond well to it for you to be able to forgive them. It doesn't require them owning what they did for it to happen. Obviously, for reconciliation to happen, that process needs to take place. But for you to begin to let go of your grudges and resentment and anger, for you to find freedom and let go, they don't have to own anything. Forgiveness is about you letting go and extending grace to them. What they do with that is out of your control, and in some ways, none of your concern. The last thing I'll say is that forgiveness is not a one-time thing. It can take time, and it can take repeated forgiveness over and over and over again. That doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. You can forgive someone, and you will wake up one day and it feels like it just happened again. That doesn't mean you didn't mean it. That doesn't mean you're not doing the right thing. It just means you need to keep forgiving. Maybe a question for you to think through this week is, what do I need to do in order to take a step toward forgiveness? And if you have thoughts on what that looks like in your life and you want to talk to someone about that, I would love to hear what you come up with. I'm going to do the same thing, and I will share what I come up with you. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." What I hear in this, when it comes to this specific idea of these things that we weighed ourselves down with resentment and grudges, is, come to me, all you who are crushed by the weight of the resentment and anger and bitterness that you carry. Receive grace, release your resentments, let go of your bitterness, and you will find rest and healing for your wounded souls. So, to recap, holding grudges is allowing resentment to fester into bitterness in our hearts, and it only hurts us. God has given us the most powerful and countercultural and revolutionary tool to handle this, which is forgiveness. Forgiveness that he extends first to us, that we have to extend to others, so that we can take back our lives, so that we're not consumed, so that we're not stunted, so that we can grow into the people that he created us to be, and so we can show the world what he is like. Would you pray with me? God, thank you that you don't shame us for our wounds, even when we don't respond to them in a healthy way. You're not surprised. You're not upset. You're there ready to give us a hand up and help us move forward, and to help us reflect the love and grace that you're extending to us to others. God, this is a hard truth. At least it is for me. When it comes to deep wounds, forgiving people, especially those who don't take any responsibility or own any wrongdoing is extremely difficult, and it feels good sometimes to just be angry. But God, I pray that you would continue to show us the ways that our resentment is only damaging us. God, I pray that you would give us the energy and the courage to let go, to release our anger, and to find it in our hearts to forgive as you have so graciously forgiven us. God, we love you. Amen.